April 16, 2007. Blacksburg, Virginia. Total chaos is breaking out at the Virginia Tech campus as a deranged gunman opens fire on unsuspecting students and staff. The horrific attack would claim the lives of 33 people, becoming the deadliest school shooting in America. Tonight, we relive the horrors of the Virginia Tech massacre. Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University is located in the small town of Blacksburg, Virginia. The main campus is situated on 2,600 acres of land, with dozens of academic and residential buildings. Thousands of students attend the school each year, seeking an education in fields like engineering, computer science, and technology. The vibe and culture are pleasant and welcoming, and the school is highly regarded as safe. In the spring of 2003, the admissions department at Virginia Tech received an application from a person named Cho Sung-hee. Cho enrolled as an undergraduate major in business information technology and had recently graduated from Westfield High School. His grades and SAT scores were also impressive, which prompted the university to accept his application. What the department didn't know at the time, however, was that Cho was mentally ill and had previously been diagnosed with selective mutism. He had also displayed homicidal fantasies in his childhood, and was by all accounts an extremely shy loner. Due to strict privacy laws, however, Cho's disability and special education status were not disclosed to Virginia Tech. As a result, administrators were unaware of the red flags and potential problems this particular student could pose. In the weeks leading up to his university debut, Cho was excited at the prospect of living on his own, and had shown a newfound independence. Despite being shy and sheltered throughout his life, he was beginning to show maturity, and his mental health appeared to be improving. His application to Virginia Tech was smooth and uneventful, and his future looked bright and promising. Unfortunately, things are not always what they seem, and looks can be deceiving. Though nobody knew it at the time, this seemingly shy and quiet student would go on to change the legacy of Virginia Tech, possibly forever. Cho Sung-hee's first year at Virginia Tech seemingly went without incident. Though reports indicate he was teased for his awkwardness, Cho apparently brushed it off and remained focused on his studies. It wasn't until the fall of 2005 that his presence on campus became widely known. Although he had been a quiet and good student up to that point, his behavior suddenly turned dark. Cho was taking a poetry class at the time, and left a chilling impression on his peers almost immediately. Nikki Giovanni, his professor, described him as a menacing and hostile individual. Cho would reportedly show up to class wearing sunglasses and a hat, and refuse to speak or participate. He would also introduce himself as ? And even write that pseudonym on a sign-in sheet. Cho's disturbing behavior escalated as he began writing violent and obscene poetry, and even photographed the legs of female students. It had gotten so bad that several female students refused to come to class, insisting on remote learning. After weeks of dealing with his disruptive behavior, Professor Giovanni complained to the department head Lucinda Roy, demanding that Cho be removed from her class. Although Roy understood Giovanni's concerns, she didn't immediately grant her request. She instead discussed the matter with her colleagues, and an investigation into Cho's behavior commenced. Giovanni was then contacted by the department, who offered to have security present during her classes with Cho. She refused the offer, stating she did not want to teach Cho at all. Unfortunately for her, he would remain in her class, while administrators scrambled to find him a suitable alternative. Giovanni would quickly reach her breaking point with Cho and gave Dr. Roy an ultimatum. In a stern manner, she threatened to resign from her position if Cho was not removed from her class. This time, the university would honor her wishes.
I know people want to say that he was crazy, but I always thought I taught him. I thought he was evil. And that's not a term that you get to use a lot because people think, oh, nobody's evil, everybody just has a problem. But I thought he was evil. And I had said to my department head, I'm going to, either you get him out of my class or I'm going to resign. And she didn't believe me, Lucinda Roy. Lucinda didn't believe me. And she was like, well, you're not. I said, Lucinda, on Thursday, either he's out of my class or my resignation is on you. Because I wasn't going to, and lead us not, evil, it does something different. I've had crazy students. I've had students that have come back from war. They've had problems. I taught a couple of Tourette. I've taught people that had problems. I'm not afraid of problems. I've taught alcoholics. My father was one, so I've lived with, he was evil. And that's the only person that I ever said, he's got to, we're not going to exist in the same space. And she did finally realize, he didn't realize it either, I think, that I was serious. Because when I said that, I don't have private conversations, by the way, with students. And so I'm in class and I'm saying, Mr. Cho, we're not working. I'm not able to teach you and you're disrupting my class. So one of us, one of us has to go. And he said, I'm happy here. I don't want to come out of the class. I said, well, let me put it another way. This is not column A and column B. Either you're going to leave or I'm going to resign. And he said, oh, you won't resign. I said, oh, sir, you don't know me at all because I'm gone. And of course, they got him out of my class.
Cho's academic and behavioral struggles would unfortunately persist. Following his removal from Professor Giovanni's class, Lucinda Roy began teaching him one-on-one. However, she soon became concerned for her safety and created a duress code for her and her assistant to call security. In a letter sent to several faculty members in November of 2005, Dr. Roy expressed concern with Cho's behavior, as all of his writings had been about shooting or harming people. She was also concerned because of his strange habit of wearing reflective sunglasses and taking several minutes to respond to questions. The university acknowledged her concerns and added empathy training to his education plan. With much help and guidance, Cho was able to compose poems and other pieces of literature that were not overtly violent. He would eventually receive praise from Dr. Roy for his work and ended up getting an A in the course. Although it seemed like Cho was making progress under Roy's instruction, his reputation among his peers and professors remained the same. A man who was a disturbed, creepy loner and social outcast. Though his troubling behavior was reported to the Virginia Tech Police, nothing could be done since no overt threats were made against himself or others. In addition, none of the agencies at the school took serious action to discipline him, even though his behavior violated student policy. As a result, Cho was allowed to continue his studies, as well as his disturbing behavior. During that same fall 2005 semester, Cho was living with 3 other students in Norris Hall, a resident building on the west side of the campus. Just like he did with his peers and professors, Cho left an eerie impression on his suite mates and was described as shy, quiet, and reclusive. Feeling sorry for him, his suite mates tried to befriend him and invited him out to several parties. However, they soon realized he was a creepy individual. One night, when the 4 suite mates were visiting a female student's dorm, Cho allegedly pulled out a switchblade and silently stabbed the carpet repeatedly. His suite mates were highly disturbed by the incident and stopped inviting him out. Although they did attempt to hang out with him a few times after that, they were always met with hostility and silence from Cho. As time went on, they accepted his loner status and decided to leave him alone. Although it was clear Cho had mental issues, he also had a dark side that was creepy and threatening. His roommate recalls an outing, in which a drunk Cho told him he had a space alien girlfriend named Jelly. The roommate thought that was strange, but brushed it off as a joke. He would eventually receive harassing phone calls from a person claiming to be Cho's twin brother. Although the roommate knew it was actually Cho placing the calls, the person on the other end was adamant in his claim and refused to give up the ruse. Things only got creepier, as the roommate caught Cho taking photos of him late at night. It was the first time he truly feared for his safety. Although Cho's suite mates were disturbed by his behavior, there's no evidence of them having requested a room change or reporting him to school officials. Cho's behavior would unfortunately escalate from just creepy to criminal. On November 27, 2005, just after 11:30 p.m., campus police responded to a suspicious person call at 4021 West Ambler, Johnston. Inside were two female residents who claimed they had received a phone call from an unknown person at 11:15 p.m. The strange caller claimed to know one of the females but refused to reveal his identity.
I want to speak to Jennifer.
Who is this?
I cannot reveal my name to thee, for I don't know who I am.
Get lost, you weirdo!
No, I shall continue my pursuit of thee and my friend.
Approximately 15 minutes later, the women heard a knock on their door and went to see who it was. Standing outside was an Asian male wearing a hooded jacket and sunglasses. He asked to speak to one of the women, but was told she was not there. When asked about his identity, the man simply said he was the kid, which made the women uncomfortable. They threatened to call the police, and the strange man fled the scene. While interviewing the main victim, the responding officer learned the suspicious man had been previously messaging her on Facebook, and that he may have been in one of her classes. The victim was quite concerned, as he knew personal details about her she had not publicly shared. The officer assured her he would look into the matter, and proceeded to head back to the station. During his investigation, he visited the suspicious Facebook page and saw a picture of a man wearing a Nike t-shirt. The face had been whited out, and a question mark was placed in the void. Two screen names were also listed on the account, one by the name of and the other by the name of Spanky Jelly. The officer searched the user's friends list and uncovered two males who were living at 3032 Norris Hall. Shortly before 1 a.m. that night, the officer arrived at the address and spoke to one of the suite mates about the situation. He quickly learned that the anonymous person, was none other than Cho Sung-hee. Cho also lived at 3032 Cochrane and was questioned by the officer regarding the complaint. He told him the whole thing was a joke, and that he meant no harm by his actions. The officer reminded him of the time and advised him that his actions were indeed suspicious and alarming. Cho willfully signed a waiver of rights form and was ordered to cease all contact with the female victim. He complied with the officer's demand, and the interaction was over. Although the incident was referred to judicial affairs, the female victim did not want to press charges, and the case was closed. 3 days after this incident, Cho called the Cook Counseling Center and spoke to a clinical psychologist. This was the first record of him voluntarily seeking help for his mental struggles, which seemed like a good sign. A telephone triage was conducted, and an appointment was scheduled for him.
Cook Counseling Center, how can I help you?
I want to speak to a counselor.
May I please have your full name?
Jennifer Cho.
On December 12, 2005, records indicate he spoke to a psychologist late in the afternoon. Although a triage was conducted, no diagnosis, treatment, or follow-ups were made, and Cho did not seek further therapy. Unbeknownst to the Cook Counseling Center, the Virginia Tech Police received a complaint earlier in the day involving Cho. At approximately 11:45 a.m., two officers were dispatched to 306 East Campbell in response to a harassment call. After speaking to the female victim, the officers learned that she had received an instant message from Cho 3 days prior. She told the officers he was merely an acquaintance, and that it was strange for him to send her a message. The victim further relayed that on the evening of December 11, 2005, a Shakespeare excerpt was mysteriously written on her marker board outside her dorm. She stated she did not stay at her dorm that night, and returned the following morning only to find that a continuation of the excerpt had been added. Upon further questioning of the victim, the officers determined Cho was the likely culprit, based on incriminating statements he made regarding the matter. The victim requested that no further contact be made with Cho, and that he be informed of that. Reassurance was given to her, and an incident report was subsequently filed. On the following day, officers met with Cho at his dorm and ordered him not to contact the female victim. Cho complied, and the officers left the scene. Just like the previous incident, the victim did not press charges, and the case was closed. Shortly after 7 p.m. on December 13, 2005, campus police rushed to Norris Hall after Cho made suicidal statements to his roommate. After a brief assessment, the officers determined the matter was serious and escorted him back to the department. Cho would undergo a pre-screening examination about an hour later, which found that he was mentally ill. The report also indicated that he was an imminent threat to himself and others and was not willing to be treated voluntarily. As a result, the clinician secured a hospital bed for Cho and contacted the magistrate to request a temporary detention order. The judge reviewed the clinical findings and issued the order at 10:12 p.m. Cho was subsequently transported to New River Valley Medical Center, where he would spend the night undergoing tests. In a multi-page report, the practitioner who evaluated him noted that he was extremely quiet and emotionless. She also noted that he would not blink, and that it was hard to get a verbal history from him regarding his depression. Although he displayed antisocial behavior, Cho's stay at the mental hospital was relatively uneventful. At around 7 a.m. the next morning, he underwent an evaluation with a licensed psychologist in accordance with Virginia law. At the end of the 15-minute assessment, the evaluator concluded that Cho was mentally ill, but that he did not present an imminent threat to himself or others. The test further determined that he was not substantially unable to care for himself due to mental illness, and thus did not require involuntary hospitalization. The attending psychiatrist would come to the same conclusion, but recommended that he receive treatment on an outpatient basis. No medications were prescribed, and no diagnosis was made. These findings were significant as it meant that Cho was safe to be released, and could no longer be held against his will. However, since his detention order was still legally in effect, a court official needed to certify his release. Shortly after 11 a.m. on December 14, 2005, Cho was taken to a district court in order to decide his fate. The presiding judge at the time reviewed his pre-screening records, as well as the findings submitted by the independent evaluator and psychiatrist. In the end, the special justice deemed Cho to be an imminent threat to himself and ordered him to receive outpatient treatment. The court order was stamped, dated, and signed, bringing an end to his detention order. He was then returned to New River Valley Medical Center, where he would await discharge. Hospital staff made the necessary referrals for Cho, and he was legally released at 2 p.m. that afternoon. This mentally disturbed student was now free to roam the streets as well as the Virginia Tech campus. That fact was truly disturbing. 21-year-old Cho Sung-hee was released from a mental hospital only 15 hours after being admitted. The detention order that initially brought him in was prompted by a report that stated he was an imminent threat to himself and others. This came after he harassed a female student and expressed suicidal thoughts. Although he was no longer considered a public threat at the time of his release, hospital staff and court officials were unaware of his mental history or track record, which included violent and obscene writings, photographing the legs of female students, and making unannounced visits to girls' dorms. Had New River Valley and the district court been privy to this information, they may have instead come to a different conclusion. According to hospital records, though, Cho denied having any previous history of violent behavior or mental health treatment. This was, of course, untrue, as he had received mental health treatment as a child and had written violent material in school. In addition, Cho denied feeling suicidal at the hospital and claimed the whole thing was a joke. Reports further indicate that despite being shy and quiet, the psychiatrist did not observe any dangerousness in Cho. Because of these factors, clinicians may have assumed his mental episode on December the 13th was simply an isolated incident, and that he was an otherwise mentally stable person. Furthermore, the medical staff at New River Valley believed Cho's testimony regarding his mental state and history, and did not verify or refute his claims with collateral data. This was largely due to stringent privacy laws and time constraints. Taking into account the limited health records, as well as Cho's cooperation at the hospital, Clinicians and court officials felt it was unnecessary to detain him any further. As such, he was released from the hospital, but was court-ordered to seek outpatient therapy. Cho, however, would not follow this order, and instead chose to remain untreated. Neither of the two agencies responsible for his care followed up with him regarding his mental health, and he would not get the help he needed. The district court also failed to ensure his compliance with the order, and Cho was never summoned. The poor handling of the case was just another sign of carelessness on the part of administrators with regards to mental health treatment and public safety. Cho's statements to clinicians were also a sign of a troubling behavior pattern, which involved engaging in disturbing acts, only to then claim jest when pressed by police. This was the side of Cho that was cunning, evil, and took gratification in tormenting others. The side that would take unsolicited photos of you, or show up to your dorm unannounced. It was the side of Cho that was most concerning, and the one that could potentially harm people. Following his release from hospital, Cho seemingly stopped harassing female students and slipped under the radar. Though he was no longer getting into trouble with police, he was still a disturbed individual who made his classmates uncomfortable. In the spring of 2006, Cho enrolled in a fiction workshop course of about 20 students. Just like in previous classes, he isolated himself and refused to participate in discussions. His professor thought about removing him from the class, but decided to deal with him instead. During the duration of the course, Cho would produce several pieces of violent writings that concerned his professor. One story in particular raised serious red flags, in which the main character nearly executes a school shooting. Though this may have seemed like harmless fiction on the surface, it could have also been a sign of a disturbed mind ruminating on murder. In the case of Cho, stories like these should have been alarming, given his long history of violent writings. Although faculty were concerned about his work, records show no disciplinary actions were taken against him. He was allowed to continue the course and ended up receiving a D+. He would encounter similar problems in another English class that semester, due to his hostility and defiance. Although his professor admits that his reading and writing were proficient, he argued that they lacked creativity. On April 17, 2006, Cho's professor asked him to stay after class to discuss his progress. He had become fed up with his disobedience and poor work and advised him to drop the course. Cho, however, simply stared at him and did not respond. When the professor returned to his office a short time later, he was shocked to find that Cho had followed him inside. Feeling a little threatened, he offered him a seat. However, Cho decided to argue with him loudly and aggressively stated he did not want to drop the course. The professor was taken aback as he had never seen him so animated. Feeling disrespected, he ordered him to leave his office and to return when he was more calm. Cho complied and subsequently sent an email to the professor, stating that he had in fact dropped the course. Though it's unclear how Cho spent the summer break of 2006, reports suggest he may have returned home to Fairfax. Reports also indicate his parents attempted to get him delivered at a church, as the minister believed he was possessed by a demon. But before the church could meet with the family, Cho unfortunately returned to Virginia Tech to start his senior year. His parents had no idea this would be the last time they would see their son. In the fall of 2006, Cho moved into Harper Hall and was living with 5 other people. According to his suitemates, he was extremely quiet and reclusive, and could often be observed studying, sleeping, and listening to music. Although the resident advisor had been warned about him, neither she nor the Harper residents would encounter any issues with him. During that fall semester, Cho had enrolled in 3 fiction courses and was struggling academically. This was of course due to his inability or desire to socialize, which was required for most of his courses. He would reportedly show up to class wearing a ball cap pulled low and would not make eye contact. Although his professors offered to grant him disability accommodations, Cho would not accept those offers. Records show that in the fall of 2006, multiple staff emails were exchanged regarding Cho's behavior. Although his extreme shyness was apparent, His teachers suspected something more was going on. Unfortunately, due to privacy laws, the English department was unaware of Cho's mental history or dealings with law enforcement. Since the university couldn't force him to speak, faculty members were left in the dark about his deep-seated issues. Attempts to remedy the situation were unsuccessful, and Cho carried on as a mysterious figure. By the end of the semester, he was becoming increasingly isolated and continued to write dark, angry literature. His eerie demeanor was so striking that some students jokingly suggested he may go on a rampage killing. They had no idea just how prophetic those words would be. In the spring of 2007, records indicate Cho was taking an English class titled The Bible as Literature. Although there were no signs of rapid mental decline, his class attendance drastically dropped off, and his visibility on campus became less. His suitemates also noticed changes in his appearance and routine, as he began sporting a buzz cut and was working out at the campus gym late at night. Though nobody knew it at the time, Cho was a ticking time bomb that was about to explode. On February 2, 2007, records confirmed Cho purchased a handgun from an online dealer and had it shipped to a Blacksburg pawn shop. A week later, on February 9th, Cho passed a background check and legally took possession of the gun. A look into the transaction records revealed he did not disclose his court-ordered treatment mandate, which would have made him ineligible to purchase firearms under federal law. Although Cho was legally able to purchase firearms under state law, his court-ordered treatment mandate classified him as a mental defective, meaning he was barred from buying guns under the federal statute. Since the state of Virginia failed to submit his records to the NICS, Cho passed his background check with flying colors.
It was a Walther P22, which is a 22 caliber weapon. It's a very small weapon. No law enforcement agency would ever issue this weapon because it's very small. Mainly used for target practice, and we've sold nearly 30 of them in the past year, and it is a popular weapon for target shooters, and that's primarily what the weapon's used for. Joe purchased the weapon from our website, and at that point we have to send it to a federally licensed dealer in the state of his residence in Virginia, and that's what we did. We verified, we get a licensed copy from the dealer. We verify that with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms before ever shipping anything out, and we send it to the dealer in Virginia. Joe would have then picked up the firearm from that dealer and filled out all necessary federal and state paperwork, and had to do the background check at that point.
Over the next 2 months, Cho would buy several more items, including a second handgun, several hundred rounds of ammunition, chains, and a hunting knife. Records also confirmed he practiced shooting at several ranges in Virginia. Cho was now turning his murderous writings into reality and was clearly planning a massacre of epic proportions. On Sunday, April 15th, 2007, Cho phoned his parents as per their usual arrangement. The conversation was routine and negligible, and he seemed to be his regular self. His parents didn't notice any change in his tone, and there was no inkling that anything was wrong. They had no idea that in less than 24 hours, Cho was about to commit one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. On Monday, April 16, 2007, the weather in Blacksburg was quite chilly, and the skies were eerily gloomy. At around 6 a.m. that morning, Cho was spotted by his roommate getting dressed and leaving the dorm. Although it's unclear how and where he spent the next hour, he would be seen near the entrance to West Ambler-Johnston Hall, just before 7 a.m. Sometime during the next 15 minutes, Cho entered the residence hall and fatally shot 2 students before fleeing the scene. The killings were swift and methodical, harbingers of the larger massacre to come. After the murder, Cho returned to his dorm and changed out of his blood-stained clothes. While police and paramedics were tending to the scene at West Ambler-Johnston, Cho deleted his emails and university account. He then rearmed himself before leaving his dorm at Harper Hall. At approximately 8 a.m., Cho was seen near the campus duck pond, presumably to discard his recently removed hard drive. Police would then learn that the female victim at West Ambler-Johnston had been dropped off by her boyfriend shortly before the shooting. Believing the incident was domestic in nature, police pursued the boyfriend, who was a student at another school. The West Ambler-Johnston Hall was then subsequently locked down until further notice. At approximately 8:30 a.m., officers would locate the victim's boyfriend off campus and detain him for questioning. At about the same time, the leadership team at Virginia Tech was devising a plan to effectively alert students and staff about the shooting earlier that morning. Shortly before 9 a.m., Cho Sung-hee appeared at a nearby post office and handed the clerk a package addressed to NBC News. It was successfully processed and postmarked at 9:01 a.m. Although the police presence on campus was heightened at the time, officers assumed the shooting at Ambler was isolated and that the gunman had left the premises. As a result, police and school officials decided not to lock down the entire campus, and classes commenced as usual. Sometime between 9:05 and 9:15 a.m., Cho was spotted inside Norris Hall, chaining the entrance doors shut from the inside. At about 9:26 a.m., Virginia Tech officials emailed students and staff about the earlier shooting at West Ambler-Johnston. Unfortunately, it was far too late, as several classes in Norris Hall were already in progress. Several minutes later, a faculty member discovered this bomb threat fastened to an entrance on the first floor. Although the staff member notified the school's administration, the bomb threat was never reported. Meanwhile, on the second floor, Cho was gearing up in a vacant room 200 before proceeding to go on the prowl. Behind closed doors, light-hearted and trivial talks were breaking out among the classroom occupants, completely unaware that a deranged gunman was lurking the halls. Students in multiple classrooms then began to notice a creepy man dressed in military attire, peeking his head in, which raised suspicion. At approximately 9:40 a.m., the horror would begin. Armed with 2 semi-automatic pistols and countless rounds of ammunition, Cho set out to murder unsuspecting students and would commit what we now know as the Virginia Tech massacre. When it was all said and done, Cho managed to kill 32 people, including 27 students and 5 staff members. The rampage lasted just 9 minutes but felt like an eternity for the victims. According to survivors, Cho was emotionless during the attack and remained silent the entire time. Row by row, he shot his victims at close range and often returned to classrooms to make sure there were no survivors. Because there were no locks on the doors, students in several classrooms barricaded them with desks to prevent Cho from entering. This tactic partially worked, as it gave students time to jump out of windows, and in the case of room 205, completely denied Cho entry into the room. Other classrooms were not so lucky, as he was able to push past the barricade and murder multiple people. At 9:51 a.m., a SWAT team was finally able to breach the entrance to Norris Hall, and several officers raced to the second floor where they saw a horrific sight. The halls were stained with blood, and the smell of death filled the air. Officers heard the last few shots coming from room 211 and began running towards the door. Upon gaining entry, they saw Cho lying on the ground dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the temple. The impact was so severe that it destroyed his face, making it highly distorted. Officers also saw several mutilated bodies lying on the ground in multiple classrooms and described the scene as a bloodbath. Based on evidence found at the scene, it was determined that Cho had 203 rounds of live ammunition left and was well prepared to continue his killing spree. Following the mass shooting, the administration at Virginia Tech sent multiple emails notifying everyone that classes had been suspended. Meanwhile, the scene outside was chaotic, with sirens blaring through the streets and people sobbing in sadness. News media outlets would quickly descend on the scene to capture the raw emotion of those affected and the horror of the entire ordeal. As the day went on, everyone would learn the true magnitude of the attack, and the incident would become the biggest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. In addition, the event gained widespread attention and dominated news headlines in the U.S. and around the world. On April 18, 2007, NBC News received Cho's package, which contained several pieces of media. An analysis of the material revealed an even darker side of Cho, as several images showed him menacingly wielding various weapons. The package also contained video files and writings, in which Cho criticized rich kids and deceitful charlatans. He also railed against hedonism and debauchery, and criticized his fellow students for their lavish indulgence. Based on the contents of the package, it was clear that Cho was an angry young man who felt wronged by society. In his written manifesto, he lashes out against the powerful and rich who abuse and steal from the poor. Several violent threats were also contained in the diatribe, seemingly directed at elitists and bullies. In addition, Cho promised a future uprising in which the weak would band together to kill their oppressors. Cho also felt like a martyr and hoped his massacre would inspire generations of weak and defenseless people. Although he claims to have been abused multiple times throughout his rants, he fails to provide concrete evidence. Those who analyze Cho's manifesto describe it as a vague and incoherent tirade filled with baseless accusations and claims of victimhood. Though there were reports of him being mocked throughout his life, the mistreatment did not meet the threshold of bullying and certainly didn't warrant a murderous retaliation. As a matter of fact, Cho spent most of his life in isolation, hardly interacting with others. Why then was he filled with so much rage that it drove him to commit such a heinous act? The answer, perhaps, lies in misanthropy, which is a general hatred for others. Although we may never know the exact motive for Cho's massacre, all the evidence indicates he was a jealous and hateful misanthropist who struggled to fit in. An example of this can be found in his diatribe, in which he fantasized about fitting in with the popular kids and living a great life. But because he had selective mutism, it was nearly impossible for him to socialize, which sadly condemned him to a life of loneliness. As time went on, Cho's sadness turned into bitterness, and he began to blame others for his miserable life. He also began to view the pleasures of others as a mockery and sin, and felt it was his moral duty to carry out a divine capital punishment. In the weeks and months following the attack, several people began to criticize the university and government for its negligence and failure to protect the public from Cho. Although multiple parents filed lawsuits against Virginia Tech, the courts would not rule in their favor. The tragic incident, however, did spark some changes in gun legislation and retail policies pertaining to the private sale of gun parts online. Within 2 weeks of the massacre, Governor Kane issued an executive order designed to close the gaps between federal and state gun purchase laws. Prompted by the incident, the federal government subsequently passed Bill H.R. 2640, which mandates improvements in state reporting to the NICBCS to halt gun purchases by criminals, those declared mentally ill, and other people prohibited from possessing firearms. The bill was eventually signed into law on January 8, 2008. eBay.com, the site Cho used to purchase his magazines, prohibited the sale of gun parts shortly after the shootings at Virginia Tech. Security and safety measures at the university have also increased to ensure a similar tragedy doesn't happen in the future. It's been over a decade since the massacre at Virginia Tech, and the school has largely moved on from the horrific tragedy. Buildings have been renovated, signs have been changed, and the sense of safety and security has been restored among the students. Unfortunately, for those who witnessed the bloody carnage on April 16, 2007, memories of that terrifying day may never fade from their minds. And although it's been many years since the shooting, the event was so historically colossal that Virginia Tech may forever remain synonymous with the tragedy. In Cho's final message to the world, he blamed the students for his death and sentenced them to an eternity of guilty, bloody hands. Although these words do not apply to the innocent students who had nothing to do with the tragedy, they may ironically ring true for school and law enforcement officials who failed to act when they had the chance. For them is a lifetime of shame and guilt. Guilt for knowing that their inactions and gross negligence led to the deaths of so many, and caused a dark aura to encompass the entire Virginia Tech campus, a dark aura that may never fade.